Crypto markets have been getting hammered recently and virtually everything is down. But that's exactly why I'm making this video, because this crypto sell-off has created for some crazy opportunities that you may never see again. So is it possible to take $500 and turn it into $50,000 on these 5 altcoins? Maybe, but right now Bitcoin is down about 22% off its all-time high. Now in traditional financial markets, anytime we're down 20% or more, this is considered recessionary. And if you think that's bad, then you have to take a look at the altcoin markets, where they peaked off back in 2022 against Bitcoin and are now down to the tune of 71%. Many major altcoins are down badly, as much as 50 to 70+% over the last couple of months. In other words, many people have already either capitulated, sold their positions in altcoins, and completely left the crypto market, or they reallocated to Bitcoin for safety, which explains why Bitcoin dominance is consistently up, as even the crypto fear and greed index is making lower lows and at one point in time hit a reading of 10, which is basically bear market territory. Now, I understand none of this actually sounds bullish, but I'll explain why this is exactly the time we should take a look at these cryptos. Buy when there's blood in the streets and retail investors have fully capitulated. Part of me believes we're very close, if not there already. And the reason is because virtually none of the well-known Bitcoin cycle market top indicators are flashing yet, which means we likely aren't at the top. And many of these cryptos will not only recover, but will go on to make new all-time highs when Bitcoin finally does top off. So in this video, I'll be sharing the top 5 altcoins that are criminally undervalued right now and what prices you should be aware of to pick them up dirt cheap. And by the way, none of these are meme coins, and many of them you've likely never heard of. These are legitimate cryptos with real utility that solve real problems. And I'll be sharing these in random order throughout the video. However, the ones with smaller market caps typically have the ability to give your portfolio more upside. However, they're typically also slightly more risky. You'll still want to stick around to the end to catch them all. And really quickly, before I get started, just as a quick income disclaimer, or a disclaimer in general, everything I share in this video is for informational and educational purposes only. It's all my personal opinion. It is not intended to be financial advice, so invest in crypto at your own risk. Now let's get into the video, and as always, if you're feeling blessed and bullish, comment 777, and if you're going to be the wealthiest person in your family tree, smash the subscribe button. Hello and welcome back to the YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name is Paul, and you can find me on Twitter or X at PauliDeFi, PauliDeFi. And the very first crypto or altcoin that I want to cover is none other than Berachain, or Bera as the ticker. The current market cap is $887 million, while the price is sitting at about $826 as of recording this video, but you might see it range within $1 or so by the time you watch. Doesn't really matter. I believe this one really has legs. Now, as a quick point of reference before we get into all of the cryptos, and I'm going to cover the price action on each of them one by one at the very end of the video. If you ever want to pick these cryptos up, all you have to do is come to something like CoinMarketCap or CoinGecko and click on markets, or just scroll down, and you'll see that on all of these centralized exchanges like Binance, Bybit, Coinbase, Upbit, OKX, and Gate.io, so on and so forth, that is where it's going to be available. CEX means centralized exchange, DEX means decentralized exchange. For the majority of you, I'm assuming you're going to get it on a centralized exchange where the liquidity is typically pretty deep, and many of these major exchanges are very safe custodians. So that said, one last time, go to markets, scroll down, and you should see these markets right here and where each token is listed so you can pick it up. Now, I don't want to spend a ton of time diving into all of the fundamentals of every single one of these tokens. I believe this is something that you can go and do homework and research into on your own, but I'm going to cover one or two major points on each. Now, Berachain is an EVM identical L1. An EVM is an Ethereum virtual machine, which is aligning security and and liquidity, powered by a proof of liquidity mechanism, which we are going to explain here very shortly. However, when you check out the ecosystem over at Berachain, because it is an L1 and it has some really unique incentive structures around building dApps, decentralized applications, and incentivizing validators and users, there are a lot of projects that are really being brought over. Now, these are the spotlights. However, there are plenty that have been listed and you do have to apply to be listed. So this is a growing and thriving ecosystem, and I'm really starting to dig it. And honestly, what I'm digging even more is the current price action, as well as one key piece of information when you look at the liquidity in this ecosystem versus the market cap. And it really all comes down to this: a proof of liquidity system that essentially creates incentives and user rewards that will keep people inside of this ecosystem using this blockchain. And for the sake of time in this video, you can see that this is a very lengthy post that has a lot of jargon. So what I did was actually plugged it into Grok and had it summarize and simplify so I can share it with you directly. So go ahead and check that post out for yourself if you like. However, here is why it matters. Because in a typical system that are like proof of stake or all of these other proof mechanisms, if everyone locks up their tokens for security, the app suffers because there's no cash left to trade or lend. POL flips this proof of liquidity. Validators secure the network with Bera, their current token, while users keep the apps buzzing with liquidity and earn BGT for another token that they offer. Validators then spread this BGT around to the best vaults, keeping everything balanced. It's like a teamwork bonus. Everyone wins when the marketplace thrives. And that's typically been a major issue in a lot of ecosystems, including even like the Cosmos, right? A lot of people love that. They have great technology. A bunch of that token gets staked in the validator set, and then none of that's actually being used inside of the ecosystem. So this truly flips everything on its head. And maybe that's why, as of recently, it's coming in at number 6 across all chains in blockchain. Berachain, with 48 protocols currently being built, consistently up in a monthly time frame relative to many other cryptos. And what I believe is really, really cool is its market cap to DeFi TVL ratio. In other words, the lower this ratio, as long as it's a legitimate chain with plenty of actual volume, such as Berachain. Notice how we have some issues right here in terms of the way that the data is being gathered, which leads me to believe that these are not true numbers, so something's off in the data set. However, Berachain does have a ton of stable coins, a ton of volume. We're talking to the tune of $120 million in just 24 hours. And right now, the market cap is about a quarter of the size of all of the total value locked inside of this ecosystem. And that's because of their proof of liquidity type system. So that said, this is a major play, and I can see a bright future for Berachain. We're going to get into the technical analysis on it and the price action here shortly, but I'm loving Berachain. And for altcoin number 2, again, these are in no specific order, I'm just sharing them as I wrote them out, is none other than Sui, currently sitting at an $8 billion market cap. And when you go ahead and look at its all-time high market cap, it was almost double that at about $15 to $16 billion on the day, upwards of $5 on the token. This thing is down almost 50% and is arguably the best layer 1 blockchain in the entire game. I've actually covered Sui at length in other videos. This is currently my favorite DeFi ecosystem, but that's because the technology is bar none some of the best in the space. Some old developers over from Facebook that were building out DM went ahead and split off, created an entirely new programming language called Move, which is built with Rust, and that creates a parallel blockchain. But this is a team with deep experience, skin in the game, and a lot of money to boot. I believe this thing is severely undervalued and could easily 10x at minimum into the top of a bull market cycle. And Sui is no joke. Since September of 2023, Sui has gone from a very low market cap that was placing SUI in the 70s range by total market cap. Now it's sitting at number 16 in the entire market. But that's not all. We had about $6 million on the low back in June, and now we're currently sitting on $1.3 billion in TVL, or total value locked, in this ecosystem. This thing is screaming upwards, even on the downside. Now, I'm going to rapid fire some information here, but right now, SUI has more daily active addresses than both Base and Binance Chain. Just a few days ago, in 24 hours, SUI saw some massive inflows in terms of dollars, and that's just behind Base and Optimism. However, when you compare all of the change, SUI is the fastest growing blockchain in terms of stablecoin supply year to date. In other words, other cryptos like Solana got a lot of stablecoin supply back here in January of 2025, but since that point in time, a lot more supply has been heading in the direction of SUI, which means this ecosystem is popping off. And so this last month, SUI received 32% of Ethereum's outflows over the past 365 days via Wormhole Bridge, which is one of the largest bridge ecosystems, or I should say tools, on the planet. That said, Solana came in at number 1 in terms of outflows from Ethereum. SUI came in at number 2. And by the way, there is such a large differential between SUI at 32% versus the next biggest, which was Arbitrum, at a measly 5%. So it's safe to say people are really excited about SUI. People are actually using dApps over on SUI, and SUI looks like it's going to be an L1 market leader by the end of this bull run. Now, I'll be the first to admit that number 3 on my pick list is Golem, and Golem is not necessarily new per se. However, I do believe a lot of people have been sleeping on it, and after having taken a look at the price action and arguably one other key metric, I get pretty excited about this thing. One of the reasons is because it's currently sitting at about 27 cents with a $270 million market cap, which is extremely small for such a big player in the game with a name like Golem. That said, the actual circulating supply is the total and max supply. In other words, it's not going to be diluted anymore. All of the tokens are in circulation already. Golem Network has actually been pretty active in terms of their socials as well, and they're consistently updating and improving their product and ecosystem when it comes to their decentralized computing platform. In other words, Golem has been working hard, and their last major update came in terms of adding it to Base. Golem Base is their new layer 2 network, which will be deployed on Ethereum and act as a gateway to various layer 3 database chains that will offer data availability, which is aligned within the Ethereum ecosystem, and it's obviously composable, versatile, and user controlled. Now, for any of you guys who are struggling with this, go ahead and plug it into some like Chat GPT so it explains it in a more simple manner, but we simply do not have the time in this video to cover it all. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to try to explain it to you here really quickly in this single paragraph on their homepage. Basically, Golem is an open source decentralized platform, which means everyone can use it, and then when they're using it, they can share computing power between all of these computers through the Golem network without relying on centralized entities like cloud computing corporations, i.e. the Amazon Web Services. And if anyone remembers what happened during the trucker protest in Canada, where banks were basically shut down because of centralized authorities and information and databases, the same actually happened to Donald Trump, right? And when he was kicked off, you had entire websites built on services like Amazon Web Services where they could basically shut you down. Well, if you used Golem, you wouldn't be shut down because it's truly decentralized and no one can shut down everyone's computers. Plus, this takes advantage of a very big narrative that is doing well this bull market cycle, which is DePIN, decentralized physical infrastructure networks. So it's got history, it's got a good utility, it's got a good narrative, and my favorite thing is its balance sheet. So when you think about all tokens in circulation, and then you think about the strength of a company, which many of us really take for granted when it comes to the stock market, we can actually look at their financials. Well, here we can go ahead and look at their treasuries, which is no different. And as you can see here, when I click right here on the breakdown, you can see all sorts of different cryptos hold different amounts of money when it comes to the majors. And so if I were to click on the total treasury and who has by far the most money in their treasury, you can see that Mantle comes in at number 1, Uniswap number 2, and Optimism at number 3. The problem with this breakdown and these numbers, and not because they have 2.1, 7, 2.5, and 1.7 billion dollars, which is a lot of money, it's the fact that you see this orange right here. That treasury is in their own token. In other words, they're going to actually have to harm the price action of their token if they ever wanted to take profit or use any of the money in their treasury for any of their initiatives, any incentives, you name it. So whenever you see a lot of orange like this, it's actually pretty dangerous, and this total treasury number is misleading, and that would include a player like Cardano or even Arbitrum. Then you can look at Ethereum and say, well, because it's blue, but the problem with Ethereum is counted in blue because it's a major Bitcoin or Ethereum. So it holds mostly Ethereum in its treasury. And this is exactly where I get excited. When you actually click over here to majors or others right here, and I go ahead and actually do it properly, you can see that 1 comes in Ethereum, which again is misleading, but the number 2, Golem, actually owns mostly Bitcoin and Ethereum to the tune of $225 million, while their market cap is about 283 on here and about 270 over here. So yes, there's a $10 million differential depending on how you gather that information. But here's my point. Right now, their market cap, okay, and the value that they provide is arguably equal to or less than their treasury alone. So when you really think about their treasury plus the value that they provide in terms of the business that they do, this is where it gets exciting. Golem is actually a really good buy right now. And when I looked at the price action, I did get excited. I do believe it's undervalued. Now, coming in at number 4, we have Sonic, which was previously Phantom or FTM. They rebranded, and I think it was a very smart decision. Currently, the market cap is sitting at $1.6 billion. The circulating supply is $2.8 billion. Currently, the total supply would be at about $3.17. So the fully diluted value is not too far off, which means it's currently at about a relatively fair value. But I also believe that this thing has really been performing. And actually, it's not even a matter of belief. Right now, the TVL is sitting at 969 million, which is actually not far off from the market cap. In other words, this thing is fairly undervalued when we talk about actual valuations in cryptos and just how many multiples above that they typically go at the top of the market. But we're talking virtually every single metric is off the charts when it comes to the DEX volume, when it comes to the app revenue, when it comes to perps volume, when it comes to bridging the TVL over into this ecosystem and even stablecoins. Virtually everything is trending up. In other words, whenever you see a trend like this and the market down tremendously, ultimately you have to say, is there more value there than meets the eye? And by the way, what makes me really bullish on this project is the fact that Andre Cronje is the chief technology officer over at Sonic. This guy is considered one of the best builders in all of DeFi. This guy is truly autistic to the next level, and that's not me saying it in a negative or mean way. When people in the crypto space say that, they actually are saying that as a compliment. This guy is next level in terms of the things that he's able to build and pioneer, and he's been behind some of the coolest technologies that we've ever seen. He's built them, completely made them open source, and many of the things that you and I know DeFi to be are because of this man right here. But even one of our professional analysts over at bullrunners.com inside of Altcoin Pro University shared just how exciting Sonic is. And this was a post that was meant only for our community members who are paying to see this information. So the fact that I'm sharing it with you, well, it's because he's talking about Sonic, and it's just one of many pieces of value in alpha that we share. However, it surged 13 times since the start of 2024. There's been over $320 million in TVL as of February 11th when this was posted. $40 million just happened in 2 separate days during those months. By the way, February was a very terrible month for crypto because the Trump top came in on the inauguration. While everything was dumping, Sonic was actually doing pretty well. Now, Sonic is a great blockchain because it has a 10K TPS or transactions per second with a sub-second finality with zero congestion, no delays. It's got a great L2 bridge. 90% of the gas fees go back to the apps, which creates a real incentive to build inside of this ecosystem. And that makes total sense, which is why it's been growing so much. And the list goes on. But again, if you want value like this, all you have to do is head on over to bullrunners.com, click the link in the description below, watch that video, and on the other side, you are going to get a library of expert courses and classes. You get live calls with many of our researchers, as well as myself. On Tuesdays, I host a technical analysis call that is only for our members, where I teach them everything you need to know in order to become a pro on the charts, as well as altcoin picks, DeFi yields, airdrop alerts. This is bar none the best space to hang out in all of crypto, and the alpha more than makes up for what you would pay. And if it doesn't, you get a full refund. And over and over and over again, we're getting tons of great reviews. As just the last TA call, someone actually shared that they really enjoyed the VRVP tutorial, which is an indicator that I trained on, as well as supply and demand inside of our university. Again, this was a call that we did only for our team, but you won't get access unless you at least check it out. So go to bullrunners.com, click the link in the description, and you'll get access to all of it and see if it's the right fit for you. And finally, coming in at number 5, a very small market cap sitting at $408 million at a price of 40 cents is Core. In other words, the FDV, or the fully diluted value, is about 859 million because about half of the supply is currently in circulation. But I really do believe that this one has legs as well. Now, again, you can find each of these cryptos when you come down to markets. You can see that it's on Bybit, Coinbase, if you have a Coinbase, Gate.io, you name it. But very similar to some of the other coins, I'm really trying to find value where the value is there, but the market cap is not reflecting. In other words, the TVL on Core is $538 million, while the market cap is actually lower. That means there's more money inside of this ecosystem than there is in the token. And whenever I see an opportunity like this, I get really excited, especially if the value inside of their ecosystem and the blockchain and the utility is great. And by the way, at Core, it is great. It's very similar to Stacks, which is basically an L2 on the Bitcoin layer 1 ecosystem. In other words, this is like DeFi on Bitcoin. And why, by the way, Bitcoin is the narrative this bull market cycle, considering it continues to gain in dominance. So Stacks is a Bitcoin layer for smart contracts, and it enables smart contracts and DeFi applications to use Bitcoin as an asset and settle transactions on the Bitcoin blockchain. The current market cap is $1 billion. In other words, the other guy is about 40%, 60% smaller and only 40% of the size. Yet Core has far more TVL, and I'm not saying far more relative to Stacks. I haven't looked at Stacks on the TVL side, but what I do know is I believe there's an opportunity, and there's definitely a difference. And typically when you see a lot of really strong social metrics and growth inside of an ecosystem or a network, it means it's here to stay. Plus, Bitcoin ain't going anywhere, which leads me to believe that more and more L2s that offer all sorts of unique programs in terms of EVMs or dApps and decentralized applications will really do well, especially if they're on the Bitcoin network as it grows. That said, they currently sitting on 355 million transactions on chain, 2.2 million Twitter followers, which is tremendous, and 5 million active wallets. So they're both built on the Bitcoin network. And again, we're not going to get into all of the little details. However, the major difference on Core is that it's built with Satoshi Plus, which combines Bitcoin's proof of work with a DPoS, which stands for Delegated Proof of Stake. Now, this introduces delegation and centralization risks. However, they are relying on plenty of validators, and at the size they're currently sitting at, it should be totally fine. They are actually bigger than many bigger L1 blockchains in terms of their validators. Now, that said, why I like Core a little bit more is because it's EVM compatible. And by the way, again, this is Ethereum virtual machine, which basically allows for them to be open to Ethereum's vast library of tools and decentralized applications. In other words, you can actually just use what's already built, which makes it easier to grow than having to build things directly for stacks on the Bitcoin network. So although stacks is slightly bigger, I think this has far more room to grow and has a lot more excitement, especially at a smaller market cap. And now to dive into the charts. Again, I'm not going to go and do an in-depth research into each one of these charts. I've done enough homework to know where I would like to buy, where I don't want to buy. And ultimately, this all comes down to what happens with Bitcoin. So I'm going to lead you in that direction. But first, let me just go ahead and start with Bera, because I know you guys are getting impatient and want to see the technical analysis. Typically, when I see a pattern like this, okay, the entire market has been up over the last few days. Currently, as of today, it's down. But as you can see, while other cryptos are down on the day, this guy is actually being bought up quite heavily on this dip. In other words, most are looking like they're down here right now, while this guy consistently gets eaten up and is now back to its prior range highs of about $8. In other words, if we break out above this W-shaped pattern, or what we like to call a double bottom in technical analysis, this is really going to be a W for Bera, and I believe this thing's going to at least double in price from that $5.40 range up to about $9. So we'll go ahead and take this range tool right here, draw it up to there. That'd be about a $3.15 move to the upside on a breakout. And by the way, in a full bull market, it typically goes a lot higher, but that would take us up to at least $12. And again, that's just the first prior move, or excuse me, the first move on a breakout. I would reasonably expect this thing to at least 5 to 10x this bull market cycle. But take everything with a grain of salt. Just because that guy is performing strong doesn't mean it can't break down further, considering Bitcoin has consistently been resisted at the $90,000 to $92,000 level, is currently breaking down and not being held up as strong as Bera right now. In other words, if we come back below that $83,700 range, it's highly likely we're going to put in a new lower low in this intermediate term downtrend, and probably touch the $70,000 range to even the $62,000 range, which would be a major support. Now, the reason this is important if you're new to crypto is because if Bitcoin dumps, virtually everything else is going to dump, which means you're going to see an even deeper discount on all the cryptos we're talking about. So I would like to give you some potential targets and ranges to buy each of these cryptos. Just because they're severely undervalued does not mean that they can't get even more severely undervalued and dump even further, especially in an event where Bitcoin dumps below the range of $78,000, which was its local low on the close right back here on March 11th. In other words, if Bitcoin does do that, it's highly likely Bera is going to dump right back down to that 560 range, and another touch of this range could take us lower to potentially even $3 to $4. So in this range, I would be a tremendous buyer of a product like this. I would obviously like to be a little bit cautious, but ultimately sometimes you have to have courage in a market where everyone is selling. Again, buy when there's blood in the streets. So I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I would watch it closely. If Bitcoin breaks down down to that $62,000 to $70,000 range, and this guy only breaks back to its range low right here, that's an indicator of major relative strength to Bitcoin, which leads me to believe that there's a lot of strong demand in holders with the Bera token, which is what I would want to be buying. I want to buy the dark horse in the race. Bera seems to be it right now with this beautiful pattern that we're looking at on the chart. Next up is SUI. Now, what's really interesting about SUI is, yes, they do have a major token unlock coming up. However, they are trending up really strong to the upside, are consistently outperforming everything else, are consistently getting a lot of stable coins inside of their ecosystem, have one of the best technologies in the space. So if Bitcoin breaks down, yes, this thing's probably breaking down below that $2 range. However, there's a major range of support right back here at the $1.13 range up to about 160. And in those ranges, I'd be a major buyer yet again. Now, if Bitcoin continues to break out, new all-time highs could easily take this thing not only to its previous all-time high right up here, but realistically 20 to 25 bucks this bull market cycle. So imagine being able to buy this thing at about 160 to even $2. But I think 160 is far more realistic on a breakdown, and potentially even slightly lower. Any wicks below that, I am buying the crap out of this token because the value is bar none some of the best in the space. And imagine that thing then pumping up to 20 some dollars. It would be absolutely beautiful. But this chart looks great. I don't even need to cover it that much. We have a major support right here at the 160 range down to about 150. If I pull up the VRVP, we'll go ahead and do that. You can see that there is a ton of volume traded at the 160 range, and even more so at the 110. So again, I don't know if we're going to hit 110. That would be an extreme situation and circumstance. My more realistic target is going to be right into this 150 range up to about 165. Now, what's interesting about the S chart, okay, is that it's actually just FTM rebranded. So what they did was probably went to a lot of major exchanges like Binance and said, hey, let's make a new token chart to make it look good in case this thing pumps. However, some exchanges probably didn't agree to that and just converted the FTM ticker to the S ticker, but kept all of the price action. In other words, this is what the chart truly looks like. And when you look at it from this perspective, you get a lot more history. Generally speaking, our actual all-time high on FTM came in at $3.50, and this was actually back, I believe, in 2021 and 2. So that said, is it possible for us to hit those ranges again? Well, as of recently, our major high was about $1.50 right over here on December 14th of this last year. What I love, though, is that we are in now a technical uptrend with an explosion of volume to the upside. So yes, this ecosystem is growing. Yes, there is a lot of excitement. And yes, we are getting lower or higher lows and higher highs. In other words, this thing is in a technical uptrend, right? Higher than this high, higher than this low. This low's higher than this low. Generally speaking, now we have a major range of support that was recently touched down at. And so I'm not saying this thing is a stupid fast mover, even though it is very volatile and pumps hard when it pumps, right? From this bottom back in August, we're looking at 30 cents and it pumped all the way up to 150, which would have been huge. But as you can see, we're actually being supported right here at this trend line. So anything at the trend line is going to be an insane value. Now, if we do break down, let's say Bitcoin breaks down really, really hard, I could reasonably expect FTM to likely break back down to that 30-cent level. We're currently sitting at 56 cents, so I don't see that being out of the picture. And if we get a lot of support right here at 36 to, I would say, 28 cents, that is where I'd be a massive buyer of the Sonic token, because I believe then we'll likely put in a new local high upwards of $2. And then guess what? If we break above 350, we're likely going up to 6, 7, 8 bucks. So again, I can't predict the future. It's very hard to tell. I don't like using fib tools this far into the future under very interesting and volatile circumstances, especially with the market where it's at right now. But I do want you to know that I am a big buyer at this trend line, but definitely below it in that 32-cent range all the way down to like 28 cents. Sonic, I think, is extremely undervalued as is with the technology they have and all of the money that is already being traded and moved into that ecosystem. Now, in terms of value, Golem has got quite a bit. However, it doesn't move as strong. As you can see here here, I'm on a weekly time frame, which means every single one of these candlesticks is the equivalent of a single week's worth of time. In other words, the last time we were actually at this range of about, let's say, 62 cents, or the very first time I should say was in March of 2021. The last time was November of 2024. In other words, it's been range bound between 16 cents to upwards of about 70 cents. And since that point in time, it has failed to break out. But if we did, let's just assume that we are range bound and we dump one last time on Bitcoin and this thing hits another 15 to 16, 17 cents. I'm a major buyer, because when you have this big of a rectangle over this period of time, the longer the range, the stronger the breakout. Okay, so if I go to a daily time frame, you can really see just how big this rectangle in box is. In other words, if we touch the 88 cent or the 70 cent range one last time, then we're highly likely to break out, and we're going to break out hard. But because this thing is so range bound, I don't know how hard the breakout would look, but I would reasonably assume it would fly pretty easily to the upwards of about $2 range, maybe 180. Then it remains to be seen where it will go. But because it's such a strong product with so many assets in terms of their treasury, I believe people are going to see the value like I do, especially in terms of volume. You can see that there was an explosion of volume over on HTX. Maybe some people moved money in, but generally speaking, I could see this thing going to at least $5. So imagine you buy this token somewhere at 17 to even 20 cents. Let's be generous, at 20 cents. And let's say this thing goes to like $5 a token. That's still a 2,400% gain. And finally, let's take a look at core. So I can just look at this chart right away and say that our major resistance is at about $4.25. Our major range of support is sitting somewhere right down here at about 38 to 40 cents. In other words, anything just below these lows to maybe 30 cents would be a pretty good buy on a dump, because I don't see this thing, even if there is major capitulation, going too much lower than maybe 20 cents. So if it went there, let's just say on a wick or a day or two or even a week, that is where I would accumulate a lot of this token, because then it would be severely undervalued. Already it is, and it's currently already down from that range high about 90%. So I'm not saying it can't dump down to 20%. What I am saying is that we are back down to ranges that I wish I would have bought back in October of 2023 before it pumped extremely hard up to 425. The high was sitting at about $7, but that was actually on a listing. So realistically, we're looking at more of like a $4.25 high. And if we break back up into this range and hit this one last time, I mean, this is such a long period of time to be in this range that I believe this thing will at least double and probably hit at least $10. Now, again, imagine you're buying right here, let's say 30 cents to be reasonable. Bitcoin breaks down and this thing pumps to like $10. You're going to be up 3,200% on this token alone. So now when I do all of the math on all of the tokens and what I shared, whether they 10x, 15x, 20x, or even in this case 32x, that is still not enough of a gain in order for you to turn $500 into $50,000, because that's the type of gain that a lot of people like to see and it gets them curious and excited. But if I'm being realistic, these are insane gains that virtually nobody in the traditional financial market gets anyways. So you have nothing to lose and everything to gain by at least checking these tokens out. And if you were to put any amount of money into something like this, you'd probably be pretty excited. Now, again, that is not financial advice. You could also lose money. This thing could go to zero. All of them could go to zero. However, I believe that's extremely unlikely because these are legitimate projects. And I just showed you the numbers on them. I just showed you that there's real utility and there's a lot of adoption. And generally speaking, they have more assets in their treasuries, or their TVL is bigger than their market caps. I mean, it's absolutely insane. But right now, we really have declined in terms of volume on this product, which leads me to believe the next move, when you have all of these major contractions, is an expansion. And so right here, wherever we start to get an expansion, even if we get a lot of capitulation back down below this range, again, I'm a major buyer and I'll be really, really happy to see this thing pump right back up to $4. But that's it for the video, folks. If you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe to the channel. And also, if you want to learn more about how to actually actually look at those things, or at least those products, and do technical analysis on them. And I will teach you everything you need to know on our private calls where you can ask me questions. Then be sure to join bullrunners.com. I will also be updating those charts with posts, again, specifically and only for our university members. I'll be covering all of what I just shared and more for these people and keeping them up to date as time passes. So thanks so much for watching the video. Be sure to check out bullrunners.com. Link is in the description below, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.